The set buzzed with activity, cameras rolling, lights shifting, and whispers filling the air. It was meant to be another ordinary day of filming, another scene, another take, but today felt off. Sandra Bullock sensed it as soon as she arrived. The air was heavy with tension, twisting in her chest and refusing to let go. At the center of it all was director Michael Carter, a man admired for his brilliance but notorious for his harsh tactics. As the cameras recorded, the pressure increased with every verbal jab, every condescending remark, every calculated humiliation in front of the crew. Just when Michael was about to tear her down again, the door swung open, Keanu Reeves had arrived, and with one look, he grasped everything. Today, the real battle would not unfold in front of the cameras. It would happen behind them. By day's end, someone was bound to lose everything. Before we move on, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow brings another special story. The set still thrummed with life. Crew members adjusting lights, cameras locking into place, last-minute script checks echoing in every corner. Sandra Bullock took a deep breath while staring into the mirror in her trailer. Today was going to be tough. Although she was no stranger to emotionally heavy scenes that had built her career, today's air felt even heavier, perhaps due to the intensity of the scene, or maybe because of Michael Carter, the perfectionist, visionary, and impatient man with no tolerance for mistakes. Stepping onto the set, Sandra could almost taste the tension. The scene they were about to shoot was a pivotal moment in the film, a moment of deep pain and resilience that would define her character. With the cameras ready and the crew waiting for Michael's cue, the action began. Sandra plunged into the scene, her voice raw and laden with emotion in every word, each syllable filled with the weight of her performance. As she delivered her final line, silence fell. And then, Michael's voice cut through. Sandra exhaled slowly, waiting for feedback. But instead of the usual technical notes, Michael let out a low chuckle. It wasn't amusement, but disappointment. "Is that all you've got?" he sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear, his tone dripping with condescension. Sandra's heart pounded as she faced him. She had worked with strict directors before, but Michael's approach was always sharp, always designed to get under her skin. "Let's try that again," he barked, his voice sharper. "And this time, act like you care." Sandra's stomach twisted. She had long learned to handle criticism, yet Michael's public humiliation stung deeply. Out of view of the camera, she clenched her fists and focused. The cameras rolled again, and Sandra poured even more intensity and control into the scene. She felt confident it was good, but the moment the last word left her lips, Michael stood and said in a tone that carried across the set, "Wow, has our star finally lost her shine?" Some crew members snickered, while most remained silent. Sandra felt that familiar sharp pain in her chest, not just from the insult, but from the challenge, the test. Michael wanted her to break, but Sandra stood still, refusing to react, even though inside something cracked. Was it anger or doubt? One thing was clear. This wasn't merely about a bad take. It was about respect. After Michael's remark, the set fell into an eerie silence. Sandra held her ground, though inside she felt a slow burn of humiliation and frustration creeping in. She had weathered harsh directors and impossible expectations over the years, but there was a difference between pushing an actor to do their best and publicly tearing them down. Michael, it seemed, never knew the difference. Sandra forced her face into neutrality, not allowing him to see how deeply his words had struck her. Looking around at the crew, some with downcast eyes, some avoiding eye contact, and a few smirking, she realized everyone had heard it. Crew members accustomed to Michael's bullying found it normal, expected even. But deep inside, Sandra wondered, was she the only one who felt this way? Sandra swallowed hard, remembering her long journey in the industry, the exhausting mentally and physically demanding days, and yet being torn down on set made her feel worthless. Doubt crept in, whispering, maybe I'm not good enough anymore. Maybe Michael was right, maybe my shine was gone. That thought twisted her stomach, but she shut it away. She knew her talent and her worth, and she wouldn't let one man's arrogance take that away. Michael clapped his hands, breaking the silence. "All right, people, let's go again. Maybe this time our lead will actually show up." Sandra inhaled sharply and nodded to the assistant director, determined to finish the scene and prove him wrong. The cameras rolled once more as Sandra immersed herself in the role, her performance growing stronger, deeper, and more real. When she delivered the final line, it felt perfect until Michael's voice cut through again like a knife. Sandra looked up, hopeful, but Michael simply shook his head with a cold smirk. Maybe you should watch some of your old movies and remember how to act. Laughter, not from everyone, but enough to make her chest tighten, echoed through the room. She forced herself to remain calm, even as she struggled with the humiliation. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Some looked ashamed, others relieved they weren't the target. Then Michael made his final blow. He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and said, "Sandra, sweetheart, if the next take isn't better, I'll have to consider a replacement." A cold chill ran down Sandra's spine. Although she knew he wasn't entirely serious, she was the lead, the studio's choice. The message was clear. She was replaceable, and no one on set would stand up for her. Or so she thought. At that moment, a new presence appeared on the set, and for the first time that day, the balance of power shifted. As Sandra tried to steady herself, the door opened once again. She glanced over, and there he was, Keanu Reeves. His presence was calm yet commanding. He took in the room silently, and from the slight furrow of his brow, it was clear he felt the tension immediately. Sandra could see that Michael Carter had no inkling of what was coming next. The air was so thick with tension, it felt as if it could choke you. Sandra kept her head down, fists clenched at her sides, fighting the burning humiliation inside her. Michael sat confidently in his director's chair, satisfied as he watched the crew scramble to reset the scene, convinced that his point was made, that he was in charge and no one would challenge him. But as the door swung open, the power in the room shifted. Keanu Reeves had arrived. Keanu took a slow step forward, his eyes scanning the room. He had seen many film sets, worked with demanding directors, and handled intense pressure, but this felt different. The energy was off, as if everyone was walking on thin ice. The way Sandra stood, stiff and unreadable, told him everything was wrong. Michael finally noticed Keanu's presence. His smug expression faltered for just a second. For Keanu wasn't merely an actor. He was a seasoned veteran, respected by everyone. Michael forced a casual smirk as he rose from his chair. Well, the legend himself, Keanu. You're just in time to see your co-star in action, or at least trying. A few crew members stiffened. Sandra didn't react, but Keanu's eyes narrowed slightly. A dangerous glimmer flashed across his face, the kind that makes you choose your words carefully. Michael didn't seem to notice, or worse, he clapped his hands again. "All right, let's reset. I want to better take this time, unless you need a break." It was a challenge, a dare. Before Sandra could answer, Keanu spoke up. "How about we take a minute?" The set fell silent. Michael turned his head, his smirk faltering slightly. "A break? You've been running this scene back to back, and I think we all could use one." Michael let out a small, amused laugh. "We don't have time for that. We're already behind schedule," Keanu tilted his head, replying evenly. "Maybe pushing people to the breaking point isn't the best strategy." A few crew members exchanged looks. It wasn't a loud statement, yet it cracked Michael's once undisputed authority. Michael's smile tightened. "I appreciate the concern, but I know how to run my set." Keanu didn't blink. Then, after a moment of silence, he calmly said, "From what I see, it looks like you're pushing everyone into the ground." The entire crew froze. Sandra's breath hitched. Keanu wasn't raising his voice, but his controlled defiance was powerful. For the first time, Michael Carter looked unsettled. Forced to laugh, though his body was tense, Michael shot back, "Do you think breaking people down makes them perform better?" His tone remained steady, but his face twitched. "Do you have any idea how many films I've directed?" Keanu nodded slightly. "And how many people left hating the process afterward?" That hit Michael hard, and for once, he had no response. The silence stretched on until Sandra stepped forward. Her voice was calm yet strong. "Keanu's right." Michael turned to her, eyes narrowing, but she continued. "This set isn't just about the movie, it's about the people making it. We all love this project, but that doesn't mean we should be treated as if we're replaceable." A beat of silence followed. Then the assistant director, now called Julia, set down her clipboard. A camera operator stepped back, and the script supervisor crossed her arms and nodded. One by one, people started to make a choice. Michael's control was slipping. For the first time, he wasn't the one giving orders. The question loomed. Would he let this moment ruin his career, or would he finally see that he wasn't untouchable anymore? The set fell into a heavy silence as crew members slowly began leaving their stations. Michael Carter sat frozen in disbelief, watching the power shift among those he'd ruled for so long. Fear and control had been his tools, but now his own team was walking away. And worst of all, it was Sandra and Keanu who had started it. Some crew members stayed behind, uncertain, unwilling to risk their jobs, while others exchanged silent glances of shared resentment. For years, they had endured Michael's humiliating methods, his cruelty masked as perfectionism. Now they faced a simple choice: stand with him or stand for respect. The first real voice of defiance came from Brian, the lighting technician who had worked on sets for 15 years. Clearing his throat, he said, "I've been here for 15 years, and I've never worked under someone who makes me dread coming to set every day. Until now." Michael's eyes flashed with anger, but Brian continued, "You push people to the edge and call it great directing, but all you do is break them down." A few others murmured in agreement. Keanu and Sandra stayed silent, watching as the crew found their voices. Then Julia, the assistant director, crossed her arms and declared, "I've been trying to tell you for months, Michael, you're not working like this anymore." Michael let out a harsh laugh, trying to mask the cracks in his control. "So this is it? You all think you can run this movie without me?" he sneered. No one answered, and that silence was louder than any argument. Sandra took a step forward, her voice steady. "No movie is worth my dignity, and no director is worth my respect if they don't give it back." Gasps rippled through the crew. Michael's face drained of color as Sandra continued, "I mean what I said. If things don't change, I'm out." Michael's jaw clenched. "You're under contract." Keanu finally spoke, his calm voice edged with steel. "And so is the studio, which means they have as much say in what happens next as you do." In that moment, Michael realized he wasn't in control anymore. His fate was no longer solely in his hands. Later, in a cold, tense studio conference room, Sandra sat at a long table with arms crossed, her expression steady yet unreadable. Keanu sat beside her, calm and unwavering, a quiet, undeniable force. Michael Carter no longer smiled, and the lead producer, now Thomas, flipped through his papers, already briefed on the day's events. "We have an issue," Thomas said sharply and professionally. "It's not just about delays, it's about workplace treatment, about how this production is run." Michael chuckled dryly. "Oh, come on, Thomas. I push my actors to get their best performance. It's what I've always done." Sandra's expression didn't change, but Keanu tilted his head, his eyes unyielding. "That's not what this is about, Michael," Thomas said, tapping his fingers on the table. "The problem isn't your methods. It's your complete lack of respect for the people you work with." A few executives nodded, and Michael, for the first time, looked truly nervous. Julia then added, "Michael, you don't just push people, you belittle and humiliate them in front of everyone." Michael's jaw tightened. "Oh, please. Sandra is a professional who knows how the industry works." Sandra calmly replied, "I do, and I also know the difference between a tough director and a toxic one." Michael rolled his eyes. "Oh, give me a break." Keanu leaned in, his tone controlled but firm. "That's not the only issue, Michael." At that, Michael fell silent. He knew deep down that this wasn't just about Sandra. It was about the entire crew speaking up. Now the studio was listening. Thomas set his papers down and declared, "Here's where we stand. This production cannot move forward in a hostile work environment. We've invested too much in this film to let it crumble over power struggles." Michael stiffened, glancing at the other executives. Finally, he asked quietly, "What exactly do you want me to do?" Sandra raised an eyebrow, and Keanu remained silent. Thomas smiled slightly. "Michael, you've admitted you pushed too far, and if you don't change, we'll replace you." For the first time, Michael looked genuinely rattled. He knew he could fight this and risk losing everything, or he could swallow his pride. Looking around at the determined faces of Sandra, Keanu, and the crew, he exhaled slowly. "Then what should I do?" Sandra replied steadily, "Change, or step aside." Michael's face was unreadable, but deep inside, he knew he had reached his limit. His fate was now in the hands of the studio and the people who believed in respect and dignity on set. During a break, Keanu and Sandra watched a playback of the last scene. Sandra sighed. "Do you think he'll really change?" Keanu sipped his coffee, his eyes calm yet knowing. "People don't change overnight, but sometimes they change just enough." Sandra smiled, feeling the weight of the past days lift as she finally felt good about being on set again. The camera started rolling once more, and Sandra delivered her best performance yet. Every crew member watching, even Michael, nodded subtly behind the monitor. But the real question lingered. Would Michael's new approach last, or was it just another performance? Only time would tell. As the weeks passed, the atmosphere on set changed. Michael Carter, still strict and demanding, learned to control his temper and offered constructive criticism instead of humiliation. He pushed his actors, but not at the cost of their dignity. And Sandra, for the first time in a long while, actually enjoyed her work. One evening after filming, while Sandra was packing up, she heard a familiar voice. "You were incredible today." Turning, she saw Michael standing there with his hands in his pockets. He studied her carefully, then said, "Thanks." After a pause, he added, "I meant what I said before. I pushed too hard and almost lost everything because of it." Sandra raised an eyebrow. Michael smirked slightly. "Let's just say I got lucky. If Keanu hadn't called me out, if you hadn't stood your ground, I wouldn't be here right now." Sandra crossed her arms. "So, is this the new Michael Carter?" He sighed. "I don't know, but I'm trying." Sandra nodded slowly. That's all anyone can ask for. A few days later, while Sandra sat in her trailer looking over her next script, there was a soft knock at the door. Keanu stepped in with his familiar smile and after a moment slid a folder across the table. Sandra flipped through the pages, her eyebrows raised at the new project. Keanu nodded. "I read the script. It's good, and they want both of us." Sandra smirked. "Another drama or something lighter this time?" Keanu chuckled. "A little bit of both." She leaned back, tapping the folder, and Michael grinned knowingly. "Let's just say we get to choose this time." For the first time in a long while, Sandra felt in control of her choices, her career, and her future. As she looked down at the script, one thing was clear. Whatever came next, she wouldn't be walking into it alone.